Hi, Laura.
Hey, Megan.
So, we're talking today about the blog post that you wrote entitled Neurodivergent Queers. And I think that I am not an expert on neurodivergence, but I do think it's a super queer subject and so interesting. Um, Especially, I think what I find very interesting is how do we open it up and look at a neurodivergent experience as just being one that is like not on a hierarchy of other experiences, but actually just a different creative way of having a human experience, right?
Sure.
I mean, does that make sense?
Right. How I like to think about it is that there's so much we don't know about how our minds work and all of the different beautiful ways our minds can work, right? And unfortunately, throughout history, this has been pathologized if certain minds work outside of the norm that works well for certain systems and structures, like capitalism and productivity.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there are just like a lot of different neurotypes. And how we understand that right now is this like binary of neurodivergence versus neurotypical.
Yes, yes. Actually, when I went back to, I mean, later in life, I went back to grad school. I was having so much trouble. And my girlfriend at this, I said something to my girlfriend, like, do you think I have ADHD? And she said, you think? So I did go get like the extended test or whatever, and I am on the spectrum. The spectrum is quite wide, so I feel like I'm fairly well functioning, but it actually did sort of help me in understanding myself and understanding why certain things were harder for me. And and now I see, oh, there's certain things that are hard for me, but I don't know. I've worked on a lot of self-compassion over the years. So now I just focus on the things that I'm better at. And yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, I relate to that in a lot of ways, right? Like this isn't a real, diagnosis, but I definitely identify as someone who's like a highly sensitive person. And truly, I just think that's probably somewhere on the wider, what's called the broader autism phenotype.
mm,
I don't identify as autistic, but right, I think highly sensitive people are probably, in that wider universe of what we call autism. But I don't consider myself to have a disability, so I don't claim
yes,
that title.
yeah. But I do think that you work with at least a few. And so I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit about, people that, what are common things that people come in with and are working on with you in that's kind of in that space.
Yeah, so I work with a lot of people who either have been diagnosed with ADHD or autism or are exploring whether that might be a spectrum that they're on. Um, and I would say the main themes that I see come up in our sessions are a feeling of being an outsider, a feeling of not being good enough, feeling like a failure,
Mm,
right? And also a sense of helplessness, right? Say you're a kid with ADHD, you're often told by teachers or parents growing up that you're just not doing it right.
yes.
And so you internalize that, and then maybe you're 30 years old and you show up to therapy and you have this narrative that I just don't do it right. I'm not doing life right. And so a lot of shame. I would say shame is the number one thing.
Yeah, I really get that. I was reading something about recently about, that childhood education is not set up well for boys. And I was just kind of reading about that, boys needing, not always, but oftentimes more room, more, less get in the chair and stay there. And, I think it's like we don't do well for so many people right from the start,
Yeah.
right? It's like we have this idea of what things should be, which is so limiting.
Right, and that's who we call neurotypical in
Yes,
our culture right now.
yes, neurotypical, exactly. Um, so in your article, you talked about sort of a theory, and you pointed to like a theory. Can you talk about that for a second? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I do. I do. I believe you're talking about um, the overlap between neurodivergence, namely people with ADHD and autism, and queerness or transness. And um, I will say that this research field is like developing and not a whole lot is known about it at this point. But what's starting to be documented is a much higher than average, right, incidence of autism and ADHD among queer people.
Hmm. Hmm.
In the theory behind that, is that because queer people, actually I'm gonna reverse it real quick, but I do think it's a reciprocal relationship. So say that you are, yes, queer, and you've come out as queer or trans, sort of have a different relationship to what is expected of you, right? You've already sort of broken outside of that box. You
Yay. You're broken outside of the box, which, in our society, like many look at that and go, oh, not a good thing.
Sure.
Divergent, not a good thing. Queer, not a good thing. But it's actually,
Yeah.
I believe, a
It's
lot.
great, right? Like when we love ourselves as queer people, we embrace, right, being outside of the norm and being able to think creatively about our lives and
Yeah,
who we get to be. And so the theory is that if you're queer, you're already more open to the possibility of different ways of being and maybe more accepting of that part of yourself. And so the reverse is true, right? Like if you are on the ADHD or autism spectrums, or both, they often go hand in hand, um, you are used to thinking outside of the box, right? You're not thinking in a neurotypical way, and you might be more open to the possibility that you're non-binary, you're queer, right? You exist somewhere not in the dead center of a spectrum that is gender or sexuality.
exactly. I mean, doesn't that whole thing just sound like more freedom, more space?
Yeah, but unfortunately, right, like if you're autistic and you are trans, right, you're also doubly marginalized,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? So, yes, in theory, there would be more freedom there, more space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Often
I
gets
guess
hampered. Yeah.
what is the lens that you're looking through, right?
Mhm. Sure.
Did you ever read Far from the Tree?
No,
Oh,
no.
it's a really wonderful book, and it talks about people with different, um, like people who don't hear, people who don't see, like different experiences of life, and it really makes you look at that experience in a very different way.
Mm. Like
As
an
a
empowered way.
Yes, as opposed to like there's a box, and those of us that are in it that are neurotypical or having physical typical experiences are the right ones, and
Mhm.
everything outside of that that's a shame, right? And
Right.
it kind of blows that open. It's a very beautiful book.
Yeah.
um I thought you put in your article, and I want to hear anything else you have to say, or if you don't have anything else, this would be a good place to end it. But you put in a quote by Audre Lorde, and it says, "Queer is not about who you're having sex with, that can be a dimension of it, but queer is as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it and has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. And I think that's such a beautiful quote and kind of exactly talks about that theory. It's like if you don't match up with everybody, it asks that life experience asks you to be creative. It,
Yeah.
right?
Right. So it's both, right? Like, yeah, their marginalization is real and it does open up this space,
Yeah,
right? For us, especially if we have support of a loving community of
yeah,
people who like understand where we're coming from.
totally. Um, I, I guess I would also ask you, um, where would you like to see our community go? Like, can you think of anything that you think would be good milestones to reach or ways in which we can understand or help this population in a better way?
Yeah, I think just embracing different ways of being in the world, right? Which is something that we as queer people already have some practice in. And I think as a community, we still have a far way to go. I know that for me, as I've learned more about neurodivergence, right, as a therapist, it's enabled me to show up with more compassion for like all sorts of people in the world, right? Because neurodivergence is a pretty big umbrella, some argue, right? This includes people who experience um, psychosis and have, diagnoses like bipolar disorder, right? I think that this is really about having not only like compassion and tolerance. I don't think tolerance is nearly enough. It's like, yeah, let's embrace different ways of being and be curious about it. Like be curious about each other's experience and how we perceive the world and not assume that it is how we move through the world.
Right. Okay, I do have one more question.
Or
Do you do you think, like in your heart, do you think that there's really a neurotypical experience? And what do you think that means?
I think that's a complex question,
Yeah.
but I would say that there are neurotypes, right, that um, are more set up to thrive
Mhm.
in our society,
Right, right.
right? And that is what is considered neurotypical. Right?
Yes.
There's this theory that one of the ways that ADHD developed was in like hunter-gatherer societies, and like ADHD was like an adaptive way to like be really good at like finding things to gather. And I think that's probably reductive.
Yeah.
But I think context really matters. And I still think we just don't, there's so much we do not know.
You could say that's such a beautiful answer. And thank you for that. And also you could say that about racism as well. You know, how our society is really very much set up, for white cishet
Mhm.
people,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And you fall outside of that and the society is not helping you along. Right. Thank
That's
you so much, Laura. I love talking to you about
a-
this.
You too, Megan. Thank you.